Hi, Year 3. So last week in our piece of writing that we did for English, it was a more of a factual piece of writing where we were looking at the uniform of the Roman and the Celtic warriors, and we looked at how we were going to organise and put all that together. So this week we are going to be concentrating on a more creative piece of writing, and again looking at how we can work together to get our ideas organised and to really look at breaking down the story into different sections. So to introduce us to this, we're actually going to share a story together, and we're going to use this story over the next couple of days to really analyse it, pull it apart, look at all the different components of it, all the different sections, some of the vocabulary that's being used, and then we're going to use all of those things that we can find and identify in the story to help us with writing our own version of the story. So obviously today we need to start off by reading the story together. Now there is a copy of the story in the folder for today, which you might have got printed off. If you haven't got it printed off yet, we're going to share it on the screen together in a moment anyway, so we can read it off there, but you might just prefer to have a paper copy to read through because sometimes it's a little bit easier. So the story is called The Coming of the Romans, and as it suggests from the title, it tells us all about a time where the Romans were invading a particular area of Celtic Britain and what happened during that time. So we're going to read through it together. Again, like I just said, follow it through on here, follow it through on your own piece of paper if you've got it printed off. And then obviously you'll have time to go back and look over any bits again that you want to as we go through. So it's called The Coming of the Romans. Beric awoke to unusual sounds. Men were shouting and running about. Ponies were stamping and snorting. He opened his eyes. As usual, the first thing he saw was the great cone of the thatched roof above him, hung with smoky cobwebs. He rolled over to look at the wood fire in the centre of the roundhouse, where his mother should have been crouched cooking bannocks for his breakfast. The fire was a low mound of ashes glowing orange in the middle. She had not even put more wood on it yet. Beric threw off his blanket and rolled off the pile of sheepskins. He pulled on his clothes and ran outside. Beric's roundhouse was one of 5 in the farmstead. His was the biggest. If you stood with your back to the far wall and walked right across, it took 20 paces, except you had to go round the fire in the middle. Grandfather, father, mother, Uncle Craddock, Auntie Bronwyn, Beric and his sister Gwen all lived there. Other uncles and their families lived in 2 of the other huts, and the other 2 huts were for storing farm equipment. The houses were arranged in a circle with an open space in the middle. A wooden stockade surrounded the farmstead with 2 gates in it. This morning, the enclosure was filled with people and ponies. Beric's stomach churned with excitement when he saw what was standing outside his house. 2 beautiful copper-red ponies with bright bronze studs and ornaments on their harness were hitched to a low, light war chariot. A young man stood in it, holding the reins proudly, while its owner stood behind him, shouting orders to everyone. Beric did not know the chief in the chariot, but he knew from the golden torque around his neck that it must be one of the sons of Budok, king of the Dubonai. Beric, don't stand there like a fool. Run and harness White Star, said Beric's father suddenly as he bustled past Beric, carrying his spear, while his mother tagged along behind, desperately trying to buckle on his sword belt for him. Beric ran for the harness and hurried to find his father's favourite pony. 3 hours later, Beric was still excited, but he was scared as well. Along the old track to the sea, a long column of the Dubonai warband moved. First came the great men in their chariots. There was one woman warrior among them too. Then came the farmers, like Beric's father, riding their ponies with their wood and bronze shields slung on their backs. Young relations and slaves trotted along beside their leaders, carrying spears. Beric was still a bit angry that he had not been allowed to bring one of his father's hunting spears. You are coming as a messenger, not a warrior this time, his father had insisted. I promised your mother. When the fight came 2 days later, Beric saw it all from the top of a tree where his father had left him. Watch what happens. If I can't come back, run home and tell them. Look after your mother and sister. The battle was not how battles should be. The chiefs of the Dubonai charged out in their chariots, their chests blue with war patterns painted with woad. Their hair flew in the wind as they shouted challenges to the heroes of the Roman army to come out and fight them. But no heroes came, just a wall of square shields moving forward all together like one great animal, clanking slowly and steadily on. The chiefs were too proud to fight common men, so they moved back. The main army of the Dubonai left their ponies and ran forward, screaming war cries. The Roman walls stopped. Just before the Dubonai reached them, a hail of spears flew from the Roman line. Then the line of shields moved forward again, with the short Roman swords chopping and stabbing around them. Crunch, clank. The Roman animal ate the Dubonai warband. Beric found White Star and rode home like the wind. Okay, so that is our story. So we've just read all the way through that together, because sometimes it's nice to get the full flow of it before we start looking at the different parts to it. So going back right to the beginning of the story, okay, here we're introduced to our main character of the story, really. And our main character of the story is a little boy called Beric. And we hear about him waking up in the morning, get a lovely description of his surroundings. And then he sort of notices that something isn't quite right. Something is amiss. It's not as it would be in the morning. Mother's not there cooking. Mentions bannocks in there. Not heard of bannocks before. Must be some kind of Celtic breakfast that they would have had. But Mum's not there cooking them like she would be normally. And then he suddenly hears all this noise going on outside of the roundhouse. And when he goes outside, it is so busy. There's so much noise, so much commotion going on. People are getting ready, as we know that the Celts did in their preparation for their battles. They're getting all their horses together, getting all prepared, and they're getting ready to go off to battle against the Romans. And then we hear, as we move through the story, that once they get to the place, and it took them quite a while to get to the place that they were going, that Beric, and he was quite annoyed about this, wasn't actually allowed to be a warrior with the other Celtic warriors from his tribe. He was sent there as a messenger to go and report back what had happened. So he watched from a tree up above. And we hear from his description about what he saw. And he describes it in such an interesting way. The battle was not how battles should be. So normally we expect to see two sides fighting equally against each other, but that didn't seem to be the case in here. It wasn't how it should be. We hear about how the Celtic warriors, they go rushing forward, like we know from the work that we did last week, shouting with their war cries and with their painted chests. But in front of them, the Romans it talks about there being one great animal, just a wall of square shields moving forward all together like one great animal, clanking slowly and steadily on. I wonder if you can imagine and think back to what type of formation the Roman soldiers were in, if they were a wall of square shields. How did we see that last week? That's right, remember that tortoise formation. So it would mean they were in that tortoise formation, moving slowly towards the Celts who were running towards them. But then all of a sudden, the wall stopped. And out came the spears from this wall. And then, just before the Dubonai reached them, a hail of spears flew. And then the line of shields moved forward again with the short Roman swords that we talked about last week, chopping and stabbing around them. So we knew they got rid of their spears first and then they used their swords that they had. And he finishes with a description. The Roman animal ate the Dubonai warband. What do we think happened? If we're saying the Roman animal ate the Dubonai warband, that's right. The Romans defeated a Celtic tribe. And that meant that Beric had to go and find White Star and ride home like the wind. He had to go home and break the news to his family that were left in the home what had actually happened. So that, taking it step by step, is what our story is about, okay? But as we go through the story and as you look at this in a little bit more detail, as I was describing parts there was such great description, such really good vocabulary, that is what I want you to concentrate on today and what I really want you to have a little look at. So you may remember a couple of weeks ago, we did a piece of creative writing then, and we looked at some pictures and we thought about some words that we could use to describe them. So we're sort of going to do it in a similar way this time, but rather than having the pictures, we've actually got the words in front of us this time in the story, and we're going to see if we can identify them and organise them. So in your folder, again today, there is a table that looks like this here. So our WALT on this is vocabulary choices, and it says to organise the words you have identified from the story in the table below. So I want you to go through and I want you to highlight or underline any good examples of the different word types that we've talked about. So as you underline them, as you highlight them, I do them in a different colour. So maybe red for an adjective, blue for an adverb, but use different colours so you can tell the difference between them. And then once you've got those examples and you've found a few for each one, there'll be more than some word types than others, but at least try and aim to see if you can at least find 4 examples to put in each box. As I say, some will be easier than others to find, but you're going to try and underline them, and then once you've underlined them and you've found them, you're then going to write them into this table here, and then this table is going to help us later in the week when you come to write your own version of the story. Okay, so let's have a look at what words we need to be looking out for today. So on the table you can see it asks for adjectives. So remember, adjectives are our describing word. They describe the noun that we are thinking about, okay? Verbs, there are doing words. So we're going to be seeing if we can find some verbs. Now the reason why, one of the reasons why I want you to concentrate on the vocabulary choices for verbs is within that story, they use some quite interesting verbs. So it's not always things like walk or skip or run. They use some other words to give us a really good idea of how that doing word is actually happening. Okay, so have a look out for those verbs in the story. Then we're going to have a look at some adverbs. So remember, adverbs describe our verbs and they normally end in ly. So that's a good thing to look out for. Any words that end in ly, as long as they're describing the verb, that's a very good chance that that's your adverb. And then I've also put a box in for similes as well, because when we were doing your last piece of writing, some of you were thinking about your similes. So I thought, well, let's have a look today and see if we can find any similes. So remember, similes are when we describe something by comparing it to something else. Okay, now there's not so many of those in the story, but you should be able to find a couple in there. So maybe 2 in there that you can find where they've described in their way of describing things, they've described it as comparing it to something else. So they would say like something or as something. So again, have a little look and see what you can find. Underline it first, highlight it, and then put it into your table. And then the last part on your table, I've sort of given you an option here just to put down, if you're not sure of what word type it is, but you think, you know what, I really like the way they've described that, then you can put it in this section here, other interesting phrases. So, for example, one of the descriptions that I really like is the hail of spears, because I can picture that description just really paints a picture of what was happening from that Roman wall that we had. So the hail of spears would be an example of the sort of thing you might put in there. So phrases are a group of words in a way as which something has been described that we can put into that section there. Okay, so have a look through, see which words you like, see which phrases you like, and see if you can work out which of those boxes on the table that they would go into. And then, as I say, we're going to use that table then to help us to write our version of the story later on in the week. Okay, so I would have a read through the story again, first of all, on your own, just to get really familiar with it, because the more times you read it, the more familiar you will be and the easier it will be for you to find things in there. So read through it again first, and then maybe start going through, underlining in those different colours, and then think about putting those words into the table there. As I say, some of the ones will be easier to find than others, but try and aim for as many as you can in each one, and especially about 4 or 5 in each of the sections. But with Similes one, you might not be able to find quite so many for that one. I will be back again tomorrow to talk to you about how we're going to think more tomorrow about the structure of the story. So the beginning, the middle and the end, and how all that links together. But today is very much thinking about the vocabulary. So have a good day. Enjoy getting to know the story. Enjoy finding those brilliant examples of word choices. And I will see you all tomorrow. Take care. Bye.